I know every year there's some that pray for it, and I'm sure there are some that pray against it. But I guess it's up to the Lord's doing as He as He controls those things. Thank you. As we open the class this morning, would there be anyone who has a quick word of praise before we look to the Lord in prayer? All right. Well, if not, would there be any requests? I know there's some that are out due to sickness this morning, and perhaps some because they had responsibilities other places this morning, but we just pray that the Lord would be with those different ones. All right, we continue to remember those that we're aware of in our families or acquaintances who need the Lord, those in the community. All right, I've asked Brother Hill to open the class this morning with prayer, and let's remember these requests and the class this morning.
Father, we come to you this morning, that for each one of us, we thank you for that goodness, Lord. We pray, Lord, we come into your house to worship you and seek your face, that you would touch our hearts, touch our minds, open our minds, give us enlighten us to your truth, and help us, Lord, take it into our hearts and make it a part of us. Pray you help Brother Wilson Bryan as he teaches us, that you would give him the inspiration that he needs. Sometimes we know how we can kind of feel like we're not getting anywhere, but you're able to inspire us. You're able to inspire him, Lord. This is a good lesson. Pray that you give him the inspiration he needs. Pray, Lord, that you remember each of those in our church that submitted requests made for. We continue to remember. We ask that you remember the Wilsons, Lord. Continue to help Brother Wilson in his recovery. Mrs. Wilson, Lord, if there's health issues there that maybe she's facing, and pray that you'd help her. Pray that you'd help Brother Stroops, Lord, you continue to help him, minister to him in the home there, give him strength, encouragement, Lord, and be your will, Lord, pray that you work it out, that he can return to church. We understand, we know that he'd rather be here. Pray that you'd help, Lord, in those circumstances. Pray that you continue to help us, Lord, ongoing health circumstances in a lot of lives. Pray that you touch them and help them. And Lord, again, in this lesson, in this Sunday school hour, pray that you would touch our hearts and our lives. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Well, the title of this morning's lesson is Who is God? And I'm supposed to teach this in somewhere between 35 and 40 minutes to explain or describe who God is. But obviously there's three main points, three aspects, three of his attributes that we'll be looking at, and we'll try to do them justice, but we can't, as humans, we are finite, and I'll mention that later on, and God is infinite, so it is impossible. It's truly impossible for us as humans to fully grasp and understand and therefore describe who God is, but he gives us his word because he does want us to know him and know who he is as much as is humanly possible. And as we endeavor to seek him and learn from him, he reveals himself to us so we may better know him. The key verse this morning is found in Isaiah 40 verse 29. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. The central truth is the mission of the church is to know God and to make him known. And we'll start out by reading the passages this morning. First one found in Isaiah 40, beginning with verse 12. Who hath measured the waters in the hollow of his hand, and meted out heaven with the span, and comprehended the dust of the earth in a measure, and weighed the mountains in scales, and the hills in a balance? Who hath directed the Spirit of the Lord, or being his counselor hath taught him? With whom took he counsel, and who instructed him, and taught him in the path of judgment, and taught him knowledge, and showed to him the way of understanding? Behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket, and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Behold, he taketh up the isles as a very little thing. And Lebanon is not sufficient to burn, nor the beast thereof sufficient for a burnt offering. All nations before him are as nothing, and they are counted to him less than nothing, and vanity. To whom then will ye liken God, or what likeness will ye compare unto him? Continue with the next section. To whom then will ye liken me, or shall I be equal, saith the Holy One? Lift up your eyes on high, and behold, who hath created these things that bringeth out their host by number? He calleth them all by names, by the greatness of his might, for that he is strong in power, not one faileth. Why sayest thou, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel, my way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God? Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary? There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. As the central truth states, the mission of the church, and therefore our mission, is to know God and to make him known. And I believe that when we seek to know God and truly know him to the best of our abilities, the making him known part will automatically flow from that. So when we realize how wise of a God we have the privilege of knowing, or how sovereign he is, how strong he is, when we really grasp that and we know that personally, sharing that with someone else should come pretty easily. When our lives are filled and abound with his goodness, it will flow outward to those around us. I do like that the writers of the lesson have made the points of the lesson personal in nature. So the title is Who is God, but then each of the points is our God. Our God is wise. Our God is sovereign. Our God is strong. Although he is wise and sovereign and strong, he does not stand afar off, although he very well could. But he desires that we would have a close relationship with him. He is our God, and we are his people, and he even claims us as his own. We read that in Zechariah 8:8. They shall be my people, and I will be their God. This one who is so far above us, the high and lofty one who inhabits eternity, longs for each of us and every one of us to call him our God. Not to claim him as in possession, as in, well, he's our God or my God, that we can kind of use him in a way to get what we want. But we claim him in that we belong to him and we do his bidding, not vice versa. In this first part of the lesson, we see that our God is wise, and Isaiah draws attention to this by asking a series of rhetorical questions. It put me in the mind a little bit about in the last chapters of Job, after Job's kind of been, and I mean, cut the guy a break. If I was in Job's position too, I would have been whining to God as well. But after he's kind of been bemoaning the fact of, God, how could you treat me this way? I've been just and I've been upright, and you rewarded me like this. And God has a pretty good question and answer session where Job isn't really answering a whole lot, but God is asking a lot of deep questions that made Job think and realize that, wow, he had really spoken out of turn. And even though he was upright and just and was living right before God, he still didn't know God as much as he could have. And Isaiah, in one way, is doing the same thing here with Israel. He's asking rhetorical questions, ones that don't really have an answer, or the answer is so obvious that it points to one thing. Questions posed to accentuate the boundless wisdom of God, questions to which the anticipated answer is, no one but you, Lord. When he's asking all these questions about meeting out the heaven with the span and holding the waters of the earth in the hollow of his hand, Isaiah presents a series of word pictures of the indescribable greatness and uniqueness of our God. He asks, who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span? So he could, be speaking about the span of a man's hand or maybe some measuring device. It doesn't really matter which. But God could do that. He could measure the heavens with his hand as we think of it. He's weighed the mountains in scales and the hills in a balance. Right away, a perspective is created between what man can do and comprehend and what God is able to do. So really, how much water can you actually hold in your hand? One hand especially, but it may mean two. You could cup your hands and, a few ounces maybe. But could you imagine even trying to measure the amount of water in a small pond, or I think we're pretty familiar with it, the pond at Penview. How would you as a human even measure something it's pretty finite, you can see it, it's all there, but if you were given a 5-gallon bucket and scoop all this out and measure it into some reservoir, you would devote a lot of time and a lot of energy to doing that, just for one relatively small body of water. But the water of the whole earth, God was able to measure in the hollow of his hand. And it gives us this view of how small and how finite we are, and how great God is, and therefore how great his wisdom and all the other attributes of his are in compared to ours. The same was true with the dust of the earth, the mountains and the hills. All of that would have been able to be accounted for with a measure and a scale as easy as we scoop up a cup of flour or weigh out a pound of produce. Now, obviously, God didn't have to do those things. It wasn't like he had to get the proportions just right, so he set up his scales and had his measuring cups and everything set up when he was creating the world. But Isaiah is giving us this picture of how small we are compared to the greatness of God. The Milky Way galaxy itself is over 105,000 light years across. That means if you started at one side of the galaxy and traveled at the speed of light to the other end, it would take you 105,000 years to do that. Yet God measured the heavens with a span. That's beyond our human comprehension. There's something, we can't even, at this point in history, we can't travel at the speed of light. Some people theorize whether or not that'll ever even happen. But even if we could travel at the speed of light, you couldn't even do that in a lifetime. And yet, God could just look at it and kind of size it up. We know that God didn't literally have to measure certain aspects of the universe when he created it. But even so, we realize that we are so finite and that he is infinite in every way, not just physically. Obviously, Isaiah is painting this kind of physical word picture for us. But this can be applied to all of his attributes. He is infinite in every way. His power, his love, his grace, his mercy, his compassion. We are so minuscule, almost microscopic. So it is with his wisdom. The greatest thought that man could ever contrive, if we got the greatest minds together and could come up with some astounding truth, it would seem like foolishness before God. Take the most complex mathematical equations, the most complex theories, the most profound philosophies, and when we hold them before God, it would look like 1 + 1 at best. It would look like C-spot run. You know, the brightest minds, we could scrape all our knowledge together, and the best we could come up with would be less than pre-K, as it were, in God's perspective. Isaiah goes on to ask, "Who hath directed the Spirit of the Lord, or being his counselor hath taught him? With whom took he counsel? Who instructed him and taught him in the path of judgment? And taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding." It sounds kind of weird, and it almost sounds disrespectful, but God has never learned anything. I was like, wait a minute. I saw it when I was studying this. I was like, he never learned he never learned anything. He knows everything presently. He knows everything past, present, and future. There is nothing past, present, or future that he is unaware of. Nothing has ever taken him or will take him by surprise. He alone is the source of all knowledge. This is why the Word declares that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It is the beginning of knowledge. Only when we truly align our hearts to be instructed by God can we truly learn anything of lasting consequence. Now, you can devote your life to study and learning of menial things, and you will gain, earthly temporal knowledge. But to truly learn anything of lasting consequence, our hearts must be instructed by God. All knowledge and understanding eventually trace all the way back to Him. If the astronomer, the archaeologist, and the biologist were true to their respective disciplines, the more they discovered of the universe, the more they would discover about God. There is nothing new that they can discover that has not been known about, if not put in place, by God Himself. So any new discovery that they make, God has either put it there or He is aware that it is there. But God is more than just an intelligent creator. He is the one who would lead us in the paths of righteousness for His name's sake. His thoughts toward us are so many that they cannot be counted. We can trust God that His way will always be best for us. There may be certain areas in our lives, even spiritually, that we would try to navigate by our own earthly wisdom. But God, who has finely tuned the universe and even our bodies and other living organisms, animals, and even microorganisms, has all of that finely tuned to exist and coexist. He is far more interested in our spiritual welfare than just the operation of the physical world. So it is amazing what He has done through creation and even life. I mean, our physical bodies, to think that every morning that we wake up that we're still alive. Like the heart's still pumping, the lungs are still working, like everything's working, pretty well. And we're still alive all these years, like we've just lived, and God is the originator of that. And we could look at the different animal species, and like I said, even down to microorganisms and how He has designed those. And it's very interesting, the thought and the wisdom that He put into those. But far above that, far above all creation, He created us just a little lower than the angels. And he is far more interested in our spiritual welfare than just what is going on with his physical creation. The same God whose master design has kept the universe running is highly qualified to guide us through our existence if we'll just let him. And unfortunately, in our humanity, sometimes we think I have a pretty good plan together. Like, this seems pretty foolproof, and I've done things like this before, and I'm just going to go with this course of action, and it's worked well before. But, there's times when we forget to really seek God about an area, or maybe we feel like he's moving us towards something, and we're like, yeah, but this way over here, it's pretty tried and true. I think I'm just going to go with this. It's the creator of the universe is trying to give us advice, and we're like, oh no, God, I think I have this one figured out. His way is always best. At times we are tempted to distrust him, to think that perhaps we have a better or more convenient way of doing things. But God is far better acquainted with ourselves than we are. He has a specific plan for us and knows what the best course is for us to accomplish it. It is he who has made us and not we ourselves. As the songwriter says, "Can I doubt his tender mercies, who through life has been my guide? Heavenly peace, divinest comfort, here by faith in him to dwell. For I know whate'er befall me, Jesus doeth all things well." We serve a wise God. He is too wise to give us anything less than what would be best for us and to glorify him. Well, Isaiah continues to portray this perspective of humanity versus the divine when he writes, "The nations are as a drop of a bucket and are counted as the small dust of the balance." And then later in verse 17 he says, "All nations before him are nothing, and they are accounted to him less than nothing." God, as we well know, did not set the world in motion and then step away like the deists believe, that he just got everything in order, kind of, wound up the clock and then just stepped away and has let things play out. He is still sovereign over all he has made. He is just as much in control of this world now as when there was only one family on the earth. I looked up, because I was unsure, so I looked this up. The world population is slightly over 8 billion people currently. And that's spread across 195 countries around the world. And yet God is still fully in control. He's not stressed out by everything that's going on, and he's not struggling to keep track of everybody and where all his children are, and answering their prayers and working in their lives and working against the evil forces in the world. God not only created and is sovereign over nature, he is Lord of mankind, whether they acknowledge it or not. Psalm 33 tells us that he brings the counsel of the heathen to nothing, and he makes the devices of the people of none effect. In other words, God's plans will never be thwarted. As we read in Daniel, it is he who changeth the times and seasons. He removeth kings and setteth up kings. Again, we may not always understand his ways, but all the schemes of man will never frustrate God's plan. It's comforting to know that he is far greater than any president or political party or social movement. The armies that man has amassed are at best, as we read, as nothing to the Almighty. As we read, to him the nations are as a drop of a bucket and are as counted as the small dust of the balance. So kind of like just the remnants of whatever had been on the scale, of no consequence. Nothing the seller's going to worry about, nothing the buyer's going to worry about. It's just some residue left over. That's what the nations look like before God. It's of little importance. It won't tip the scale one way or the other. Now, we look at the state of our world and our nation and our communities, and we think that Satan has the upper hand. And in some places of the world, it looks that way. In some ways, it may appear that way. But that is only by the allowance of the Almighty. He may be giving people over to a reprobate mind. He may be letting people exercise their free will to choose evil. But there is coming a day when those same people will hide themselves in dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and will cry out to the mountains and rocks to fall on them and hide them from the face of him who sitteth on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. It's not a good ending for those who have thrust him away in this life. He's not going to force them into conformity. Although he is sovereign, he still allows us to make our choices in this life. But for those who believe, we have this promise: blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his inheritance. Now, this was addressed to the nation of Israel, but I believe the way we look at it, it's more of a spiritual nation. So maybe not just one political group that chooses God, although when nations do that, God does honor that. But blessed is the people whose God is the Lord, whom he hath chosen for his inheritance. Now, I believe we shouldn't have our heads in the sand when it comes to knowing what's going on in the world, but we also need to keep things in perspective. All the wars and rumors of wars, all the political schemes and the military powers are counted as nothing before God. All the might that nations can gather doesn't even move the needle on God's grand scale. There is none that can be compared to him. He has no equal, and he is still in control. But how is the world in the state that it is if God is truly sovereign? Not putting myself in the place of God, but if I had those powers and I stepped back from the earth, I would think that I would want to intervene. I would change some things if, in my humanity, I'm like, wow, this is really evil. This is really godless. This needs to change. But just because God is sovereign doesn't mean that God is a tyrant. He still allows people to exercise free will, just like he did with Adam and Eve. But just like our first parents, the world at large tends to choose to sin against God, resulting in those addictions, the violence, and all the other evils that we hear about and see perhaps with our own eyes. And still, God is working out his purpose, and there will come a day when Christ returns with clouds, and every eye shall see him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Through our human eyes, it may appear that God is not in control, but he is not pressed or distressed by what is going on across the globe. Jesus even said that there would be wars and commotions, that there would be rumors of wars that would need to come to pass. And all of this is still a part of God's sovereign will. And not to make this too childish or irreverent of an example, and you'll see where I'm going with this. So we're in this world, and we see different things that are going on, and they're definitely godless. The injustice, the scheming, the corruption, the human trafficking, the drug addictions, alcoholism. And we look at it, we're like, God can't have control of this. Where is God in all of this? But were any of you ever on a bus growing up, in your school days, were you ever on a school bus that was kind of rowdy It was kind of rowdy. There was some breaking of the rules. There was some mayhem. When the driver wasn't looking too close, there was some scuffling going on. Maybe stuff got thrown out the windows. And, if you were a good student and you were sitting there and you're looking around like, wow, what is going on? Why? How can this be happening? This shouldn't be allowed to happen. It may have looked like it was out of control, but the driver knew everyone who had gotten on the bus. And he knew who was doing what, and he knew what groups of children were involved. He was, watching in his mirror. And he knew they were all going to one destination because he was in control of that. So whatever anyone did, while they did it, they were being moved toward a point that the driver was in control of. Now, he could have pulled over at any point and gotten people straightened out. That used to happen back in the day. Sometimes, I don't think it's even legal now, but sometimes people had to walk, If their stop was coming up and they were misbehaving, they got dropped off a stop early and they had to walk home. But he was keeping track of who needed dealt with. And when the time came, he dealt with them. Because although you could look at a certain instance and a certain incident on that bus and be like, wow, no one's in control of this. This is, rules are being broken. But the driver was actually sovereign over all of those things and was allowing some of those things in his judgment to happen. But that whole group was moving toward a certain point. And we in our lives may look at the world and we're like, this is out of control. Why is God letting this happen? How is this depravity allowed to just abound like this? But God is in control of it. His hands are on it. And He's moving it all toward a point and time that is in His sovereign will. And when He chooses, there will come a time when certain powers will be reckoned with. And He will be glorified and He will be worshiped the way He deserves it. Now, God could work divinely and directly in conflicts in the world, and He does. He probably does more than we realize. But it may appear that He is just standing back watching. But as I mentioned, He is watching, but at the same time, He is moving everything to a point that He has already determined. And when that point and time are reached, all will come to light and all will be rewarded. And most of all, He and the Son will be worshiped as they rightfully deserve to be in that day when He shows Himself strong. And our final passage again begins with some more questions. And these are again posed toward the nation of Israel. Why sayest thou, O Jacob, and speakest, O Israel, my way is hid from the Lord, and my judgment is passed over from my God? Hast thou not known? Hast thou not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary, and there is no searching of His understanding? Our God is never wearied. He is never worn out. He is never weak. He is never tired. He's never having what we would call an off day where, just things aren't clicking right. Even at the end of creation, though He rested on the Sabbath, He didn't do it because He was worn out. Like he labored those 6 days and it just taxed Him so greatly that when it came to the Sabbath, that seventh day, He was like, I need to take a break from all that I've done. Anytime He gives grace or shows mercy or redeems or judges or answers a prayer, His infinite supply is never diminished. And although and these days there are more people, more circumstances, more events to superintend, he is not more burdened because of it. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the lesson, it started out with Adam and Eve, and then their family grew, and then eventually started branching out until we have all the different nations of the world. So I would think that would have been an easy task for God to commune with people and to answer their prayers and to work in their affairs, because it was a pretty small group. But now there's 8 billion people, and what's God going to do with 8 billion people? Well, another analogy, although it's not perfect. We know that the sun, the center of our solar system, is not inexhaustible. Like, given enough years, it would burn out. But the rate at which it burns and the intensity of the heat and light it produces are constant for the most part. Now, the sun doesn't need to burn hotter or brighter depending how many people are on Earth. So it's not like, well, the population is growing on Earth, so the sun needs to be hotter or brighter. No, the sun is a constant heat and a constant source of light. And all that God is and does is constant. His outflow is constant. His grace is to the max. His love, His power. The only thing that changes is that now there are many more people on Earth who get to enjoy it, who get to be the recipients of that love and that grace and that power and that wisdom. His strength is not taxed more. There are merely more people who experience its outpouring. The supply of His love and grace is not diminished. There are merely more people who get to experience it. Adjust a few things here. In verse 29, we have the promise that He giveth this power to the faint. Our God, who is strong, gives power to the faint, and to them that have no might, He increaseth strength. So in our spiritual journey, this is a safeguard that we don't have to earn God's outpouring. Like, I'm doing really good, so God's going to make me stronger. No, God is promising that when we're weak, when we're worn down, that's when He's going to come alongside of us and make His strength perfect in our weakness. We find in the Psalms where David asks of the Lord, "Be merciful unto me, for I am weak." He doesn't say, "Be merciful to me because I'm doing great and I'm really outstanding and I'm feeling like I'm really overcoming and I'm just going forth in the power of the Spirit." No, there are times when we, in contrast to the Lord, will be weak. We will be worn out. There will be times when we don't have the wisdom that we have. But He has the promise that He will come to us and He will strengthen us. In the familiar verse, verse 31, "They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." These are all provided by our God. Not just the God who stands afar off, but our God who we get to know personally. In conclusion, a few verses from